This is Ling 270, Language, Technology, and Society, Module 4, Printing. In this lesson, we'll talk about the effects of the printing press on business. So one major advancement of the printing press on business was the development and the spread of the systems of accounting. And one famous document in this area was Summa de Arithmetica, developed by Pacioli. So this was a system that popularized the practice of double entry bookkeeping, namely keeping track of your debits and your credits. And interestingly as well, this was the first publication of the example of the plus and minus system. So this new ability to spread knowledge also led to the spread about the way that finances could be recorded and published as well. Also, it became more reliable. It allowed trade to be more reliable, people to more easily access information as to how where commodities could be found and what they could be traded for. And because of this, the former guild system, these organizations around particular business interests, began to be replaced by individual merchants. So people were able to engage in business more independently because trade was more reliable. They didn't need to rely on an institution like a guild. So this was another societal change that had happened because of this. And printing also allowed merchants to communicate with each other as well. So they were able to advertise to a much larger amount of potential customers. So there was a major increase in the kinds of advertisement. So we see an example of an early advertisement from the East India Company, an example of this kind of process happening. And another major development of printing in business is the development of paper currency. And before I go on to talk about this, I should note that this was a development that had, like many of the developments of printing, had predecessors in China. So here we see some examples of Yuan Dynasty banknotes developed in around the year 1300, and also even as early as the 11th century. So we see that once again, these kinds of printing advancements had often occurred in China even before they had spread to Europe. But the ability to print documents like this that developed that were meant to represent a valuable asset or currency became much more widespread, since it's much more difficult to actually bring around a valuable asset with you. It's much easier to bring around a paper certificate that certifies that you own a particular asset, for example. So this kind of process didn't really spread to Europe much later. So we see the first European banknotes in Sweden, in Stockholm, in the year 1666. And this was demanded by the fact that prior to this, the main representation of currency were precious metals, such as gold and silver. And now, of course, there's a very small amount of these metals, and it's very difficult to actually move that amount of metal around, especially when there's large quantities of it. But it is much easier to bring around a paper certificate that certifies you own a certain amount of precious metal. And this idea was first pioneered in Sweden here in 1666. And the development of a kind of stamp which could make a standard, give a standard and uniform appearance to all the banknotes, makes it a little more difficult to make a counterfeit of that certificate. So of course you wouldn't want to have someone try to copy a banknote when it really wasn't created by the bank as a way to kind of get value from that. So this kind of process was done to deter kinds of counterfeits. And this also changed how we conceive of money and how the monetary supply was controlled. So one thing to note about this Swedish bank is that they noticed that, well, they don't just need to print paper certificates by the amount of gold they actually have, they can actually print as many certificates as they would like to. And as a consequence, this bank actually went out of business fairly quickly. Um, but nonetheless, the idea became much more widespread that paper money could be a much more useful form of value. And we see the development of fiat currencies had kind of roots in this kind of idea. So printing played a pretty significant role in this process as well. And finally, one thing that printing was important for was the printing of joint stock certificates. So around the 1600s, we started seeing the development of what are called joint stock companies, where a business might be owned, broken up into shares, which can be bought and sold between investors. So these investors, it gives the investors the opportunity to give some initial money in advance, and hopefully if the business succeeds, then that business would be able to pay them back what they invested plus a little bit of a profit. So this was a new concept and at the time, and it became very significant today, especially the way that the stock market works today. So these kinds of shares would entitle a holder to that kind of investment and also to dividends as a potential share of the profits of the business as well. And the figure on the right is an example of the oldest known stock certificate. So this was for the Dutch East India Company from 1606, so about 100 years after the development of the printing press. But yeah, the ability to reproduce a uniform kind of certificate for this purpose as well was also very important very importantly influenced by the printing press as well. So yeah, here we see how the printing press actually had a fairly major impact on the way that we consider finance and the economy as well.